Imagine this. You wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, your heart pounding like a war drum. The room is dark, but something feels wrong. You glance at the clock, 3:14 a.m., the same time you've woken up every night for weeks. You tell yourself it's just stress, just a bad dream, but deep down you know it's more than that. You sit up, your breath shallow, and notice something strange. The world outside your window is unnaturally still. No cars, no wind, no distant hum of life, just silence. And then, as if on cue, you hear it, a faint rhythmic tapping on the glass. Your body freezes. The sound grows louder, more insistent, until it feels like it's coming from inside your head. You force yourself to look. There's nothing there, but the tapping doesn't stop. This isn't just a nightmare. This is your life. You've been living it for years, maybe decades, without ever truly noticing. You go to work, you eat, you sleep, you repeat. You scroll through your phone, you nod along to conversations, you laugh at the right moments. But when was the last time you felt truly alive? When was the last time you made a decision that wasn't dictated by habit, by expectation, by the invisible script you've been following without question? What if the tapping isn't coming from outside? What if it's coming from within? A desperate, buried part of you trying to wake you up? And what if it's too late? This is the horror of living on autopilot. It's not just a metaphor, it's a psychological prison. A slow death of the soul. You think you're in control, but you're not. You're a passenger in your own life, watching the days blur together like a never-ending dream. But what happens when the dream turns into a nightmare? What happens when you finally wake up? The truth is, you're already awake. You just don't know it yet. And the tapping, it's getting louder. The tapping doesn't stop because it can't. It's not a sound, it's a symptom. A symptom of something far more insidious, something that has been woven into the fabric of human existence for centuries. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the part of ourselves we refuse to see, the buried instincts, desires, and fears we suppress to fit into society. But the shadow doesn't disappear. It grows in the dark, festering, until it finds a way to make itself known. The tapping is your shadow, clawing at the walls of your subconscious, begging to be acknowledged. Friedrich Nietzsche warned us of this. He spoke of the last man, a creature so consumed by comfort and routine that it loses all sense of purpose, all capacity for greatness. The last man doesn't dream, doesn't strive, doesn't suffer. He simply exists, and in that existence, he becomes a hollow shell, a puppet to his own habits. But why? Why do we fall into this trap? Why do we willingly surrender our autonomy, our vitality, to the monotony of autopilot? Arthur Schopenhauer had an answer. He believed that human beings are driven by an endless, insatiable will, a force that compels us to seek pleasure, avoid pain, and cling to survival at all costs. But this will is a double-edged sword. It keeps us alive, yes, but it also keeps us enslaved. We chase distractions, numb ourselves with entertainment, and cling to routines because the alternative, facing the void, the uncertainty of existence, is too terrifying to bear. Aldous Huxley saw this too. In Brave New World, he painted a dystopia where people were kept docile and content through endless distractions and superficial pleasures. Sound familiar? We live in a world where algorithms feed us dopamine hits, where social media replaces genuine connection, where the pursuit of meaning is drowned out by the noise of convenience. And yet, the tapping persists. Jean-Paul Sartre called it bad faith, the act of lying to ourselves, of pretending we have no choice, no freedom, no responsibility. We tell ourselves we're too busy, too tired, too afraid to change. But in doing so, we betray the very essence of what it means to be human. The horror of autopilot isn't just that it robs us of our lives. It's that it makes us complicit in our own destruction. We become both the prisoner and the jailer, the victim and the perpetrator. But here's the question that should chill you to your core. What if the tapping isn't just a warning? What if it's a countdown? The tapping is a countdown because autopilot isn't just a personal tragedy, it's a collective one. History is littered with the wreckage of societies that sleepwalked into disaster. The rise of fascism, the collapse of civilizations, the normalization of atrocities. All of them were made possible by masses of people who stopped thinking, stopped questioning, stopped caring. Take the Stanford prison experiment, for example. Ordinary people, placed in positions of power, quickly devolved into cruelty. Why? Because they stopped seeing their prisoners as human beings. They stopped seeing themselves as human beings. They became cogs in a machine, following orders without thought, without conscience. This is the danger of autopilot. It doesn't just dull your senses, it erodes your humanity. It makes you capable of things you would never imagine. Cognitive biases play a role here. The normalcy bias convinces us that everything is fine, even as the world burns around us. The bandwagon effect pushes us to conform, to follow the crowd, even when the crowd is heading off a cliff. And the status quo bias keeps us tethered to routines, no matter how destructive they become. Neurologically, autopilot is a survival mechanism. Your brain is wired to conserve energy, to automate repetitive tasks so you can focus on immediate threats. But in a world where the threats are no longer lions and tigers, but existential dread and societal collapse, this mechanism becomes a liability. It blinds you to the slow creeping horrors, the erosion of your relationships, the decay of your dreams, the death of your spirit. And then there's cultural conditioning. From birth, you're taught to follow the rules, to stay in line, to avoid rocking the boat. You're rewarded for obedience, punished for dissent. Over time, this conditioning becomes internalized. You don't need anyone to control you. You control yourself. But here's the twist. The horror of autopilot isn't just that it makes you blind, it's that it makes you complicit. Every time you choose convenience over courage, every time you silence your doubts, every time you ignore the tapping, you contribute to the nightmare. And the nightmare is growing. Look around you. The climate crisis, political polarization, mental health epidemics, these are not random tragedies. They are the inevitable consequences of a world asleep at the wheel. But what if there's a way out? What if the tapping isn't just a warning, but a call to arms? The way out begins with a single terrifying realization. You are not who you think you are, the person you believe yourself to be, the one who follows routines, who avoids risks, who numbs themselves with distractions, is not the real you. It's a mask, a construct, a character you've been playing for so long that you've forgotten it's not real, but the real you is still there, buried beneath layers of conditioning and fear, and it's trying to break free. This is what Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, meant when he spoke of the will to meaning. Even in the darkest of circumstances, he argued, human beings have the capacity to choose their response, to find purpose in suffering, to transcend their conditions. But to do this, you must first wake up. Waking up is not a gentle process. It's a violent, disorienting rupture. It's the shattering of illusions, the tearing away of masks, the confrontation with your shadow. It's realizing that the life you've been living is not your own. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the journey toward becoming your true self. It requires facing the parts of yourself you've been avoiding, your fears, your desires, your regrets. It requires questioning everything you've been taught, everything you've accepted without thought, and it requires action. You must break your routines, confront your discomfort, and embrace uncertainty. You must say no to the things that numb you, and yes to the things that challenge you. You must stop waiting for permission to live and start taking responsibility for your existence. This is not easy. It will feel like stepping off a cliff, like tearing off a bandage, like staring into the abyss. But it is necessary because the alternative is unthinkable. The alternative is to remain asleep, to let the tapping fade into the background, to let your life slip away like sand through your fingers. But if you choose to wake up, if you choose to face the horror and reclaim your life, something extraordinary happens. You begin to see the world differently. The routines that once felt comforting now feel suffocating. The distractions that once numbed you now feel hollow. And the tapping, the constant, insistent tapping, becomes a guide, a reminder, a call to action. You realize that the horror of autopilot is not just a curse, it's an opportunity. Here is the ultimate truth, the revelation that will haunt you long after this story ends. The horror of autopilot is not something that happens to you. It is something you choose. Every time you hit snooze instead of pursuing your dreams, every time you scroll mindlessly instead of connecting deeply, every time you silence your doubts and follow the crowd, you are making a choice. You are choosing comfort over courage, safety over freedom, death over life. But here's the twist. This choice is not inevitable. It is not written in the stars, not dictated by fate, not imposed by some external force. It is yours and yours, alone. This is the paradox of human existence. We are both the prisoners and the jailers, the victims and the perpetrators. We create our own chains, and we hold the key to our own liberation. The tapping is not just a warning, it is a mirror. It shows you the truth about yourself, about the life you've been living, about the choices you've been making. And it asks you a simple, terrifying question. What are you going to do about it? The answer is not easy. It requires courage, discipline, and a willingness to face the unknown. It requires you to confront your shadow, to embrace your freedom, to take responsibility for your existence. But if you do, something extraordinary happens. The tapping stops, not because the horror is gone, but because you have finally woken up. You have stepped out of the nightmare and into the light. You have reclaimed your life, your purpose, your humanity. And in that moment you realize something even more profound. The horror was never the tapping. The horror was the silence of a life unlived, of a soul unexpressed, of a world asleep. But now you are awake, and the world will never be the same.